Yeah. Well, greetings from the other side of the planet. It's a pleasure and honor to be with you here today to tell you about some of my work and hear about yours, even more importantly. And what I'll talk about is nature-based solutions in Portland. Portland is the largest city in Oregon. It's on the Pacific Northwest coast of the United States. So I'll specifically talk about the Johnson Creek Restoration Plan. Johnson Creek is one of the major catchments in Portland, and this plan that I talk about is one of the early examples of nature-based solutions. Sounds like you had a definition, but I share the definition of nature-based solutions, or NBS. At the bottom there, they are actions that use natural processes to sustainably manage ecosystems, address societal challenges, and support biodiversity and human well-being. I'll also provide some context on the setting and the history relevant to our efforts. So I'll describe the plan and a few example projects from it, and then I'll talk about citizen engagement and some of the challenges we've encountered with NBS. And then Fiona found out about our work through the IUCN's global work on standards for nature-based solutions, so I'll briefly cover that as well too. So starting with our geographical setting, Portland is located at the confluence of the Columbia and Willamette rivers. The Columbia is the largest river flowing into the Pacific, and it was historically one of the greatest salmon rivers in the world. And Pacific salmon are central to the story I'm going to tell you today. They are an iconic species that are deeply ingrained in the identity of the Pacific Northwest. Salmon were one of the most important food items in the diet of our original native inhabitants. They called themselves the salmon people, and they continue to have a very high cultural, ecological, and recreational importance. The region really still calls itself Salmon Land. We're situated between the Coast Range and the Cascade Range in this mountains, and this gives us a very mild climate. A marine Mediterranean climate with warm, dry summers and mild, wet winters. We get about 90 centimeters of rain a year. Most of that occurs in the winter. And our population is about 635,000, but we're situated in a much larger metropolitan region of about 2.5 million people. So Portland has been doing nature-based solutions since long before the term was coined. The Native Americans sustainably managed the land for over 10,000 years before white settlement, and I'd like to acknowledge that the Portland metro area rests on the traditional village sites of many tribes, including the Multnomah, the Cathlamet, the Cowlitz, the Clackamas, the Chinook, and the Tualatin. These rivers were really economic crossroads for our original native inhabitants. And Portland began its work on nature-based solutions over a century ago through the establishment of a world-class park system. And two of the crown jewels of that park system are Forest Park here in Smith and Bybee Lakes. Forest Park is the largest forested park in city limits in the country. It's over 2,100 hectares. Smith and Bybee Lakes is the largest wetland within city limits in the country. It's over 800 hectares. And really, nature kind of permeates the fabric of the city. We have over 4,000 hectares of natural areas, over 200,000 street trees, over 1 million park trees, and almost 3 million trees on private property in an area of about 320 square kilometers. Now, Portland has been a leader in green infrastructure, which is one of the major toolboxes for implementing NBS, and I've shown examples of what they are across the bottom there. And one of the reasons we were a leader was because we were under a mandate to treat combined sewer overflows. These are older sewer systems where the sewer and the stormwater are mixed together, and when they are collected together in the same system, and when it rains, they tend to overflow. So we had a very strong fiscal incentive for aggressive stormwater treatment because treating stormwater close to its source with green solutions is cheaper than building bigger pipes and capacity at the end of the pipe. So we have approximately 2,500 green streets, which are stormwater treatment facilities that are along the side of the road that use vegetation and soil to reduce the impacts of stormwater. We have 400 eco-roofs, which are buildings with soil and plants on the top of them to intercept rainfall. These have been done in Europe for centuries, but in the United States, we've only recently started to use these. And we were the first city in the world to be certified as salmon safe. This is a certification by an independent scientific organization. They assess land management practices and the effects on aquatic ecosystems, and they found the work of our bureaus achieved a high standard for protecting rivers and streams. So I want to turn to Johnson Creek now. Hopefully you can see my mouse here. Johnson Creek is in the southeast corner of the city, indicated with a boundary line there. It flows about 40 kilometers from the headwaters to its confluence with the Willamette River here, and it drains about 140 square kilometers. Probably similar to some of your catchments, the upper part of the catchment is largely agricultural, but then it gets increasingly urban as it flows down towards its juncture with the Willamette. Now, I mentioned that Pacific salmon are central to the story, and in addition to their cultural and ecological importance, they also have strong legal importance. In the U.S., we have a law known as the Endangered Species Act. You might hear me say ESA. That was the primary law in the U.S. for protecting and conserving imperiled species in their habitats. Under the ESA, Johnson Creek has been designated as critical habitat for steelhead, coho, and Chinook salmon, and that means that the habitat is important to regional salmon populations that migrate through Portland, and so it receives extra protections under the law. And I'd add that salmon actually spawn and rear within this watershed, which is not all that common for urban catchments. Johnson Creek suffers from many of the same problems as other urban streams across the globe. Those problems are consistent enough. They've been given a term called the urban stream syndrome, and that is a term that actually comes from Australia. Chris Walsh was one of the main scientists working on that, and some of its symptoms include high stream temperatures, pathogens, and toxic pollutants. And some of the greatest threats from physical changes in this creek are fill development of the floodplain, channel straightening and hardening, and culverts that block fish passage and the flow of wood and gravel. Most importantly and relevant for today, Johnson Creek had a long history of failed attempt to control floods through engineered structural approaches. Since the 1920s, by one tally, there were over 45 studies and plans that made recommendations on how to solve Johnson Creek's flooding and pollution problems. In the 1930s, during the Depression, the federal government took the most drastic step of altering the creek's path, and it lined the lower 15 miles with rock, much of which is still here today other than at restoration sites. However, these actions failed to control flooding. From 1937 to 2020, a period of 83 years, Johnson Creek reached flood stage over 40 times, so about every other year it flooded. And this long history led to the development of the Johnson Creek Restoration Plan. So around 2000, the city and a host of other regional partners decided to take a new, more nature-based approach and employ natural processes to address chronic flooding problems. As the quote there says, it recognized that flooding, poor water quality, and fish declines had related causes, and that the common solution was to restore natural watershed functions. A central message of the plan was that a century of trying to engineer our way out of floods had failed, and they failed because we relied solely on structural approaches with little attempt to understand or account for how rivers and floodplains work. And we acknowledged that we needed to take a new approach that relied more on natural processes. We needed to give the river the room to do the work it does. So that involved moving houses and infrastructure out of the floodplain and out of harm's way, and recontouring the creeks and surrounding floodplains to store and manage floods. So it proposed a series of projects, 60 in all, along the length of the creek to restore floodplains and natural functions. 15 of those projects were completed as of today and included in a nature-based solutions report. Now, at the heart of the Johnson Creek Restoration Plan is one of its most important tools, the Willing Seller Program. This was actually started in 1997 before the plan, and it was a partnership with our Federal Emergency Management Agency. And FEMA was interested in the partnership because they were repeatedly paying the same people to repair the same houses from repeated flooding. So the city offers willing sellers fair market value for their property, and owners are under no obligation to sell to the city. But if an owner does sell, the city places deed restrictions on the purchased properties. They designate them as open space in perpetuity, remove the houses, and ensure that no future expenditure of federal disaster funds are spent on the property. And we then restore them to increase flood storage, improve fish and wildlife habitat, restore wetlands, and create passive recreational activities for city residents. So I'll go through just a few of the projects that kind of show different approaches and different issues and different drivers. I'll start with the Tideman-Johnson Park, which was one of our earliest Johnson Creek projects, restoration projects. And this is an interesting project to me because the initial goals really had little to do with stream restoration or flood storage. It was initiated to protect an exposed sewer pipe. Sewer pipes often cross streams, and this one was originally buried underground in the 1920s. But over time, particularly as the stream urbanized, the stream downcut and the pipe was in danger of catastrophic failure. And we'd attempted to protect it a number of times by adding rock riprap around it, but each time the flood would come and move the rock downstream, and we'd add bigger rock until the point where we were beginning to worry that it was actually the rocks were a threat to the pipe rather than protection. And so what happened was, in the era of the Endangered Species Act, we had to now minimize our project impacts in stream, and we had to mitigate for any that were unavoidable. And this led to providing further incentive to use NBS. So we did reinforce that creek with concrete, but we also raised the stream bed. We reconnected and expanded the floodplain to dissipate flood energy out onto the floodplain and away from the pipe. And we also restored wetlands and riparian areas to improve habitat. So the project that I think is going to be most interesting to you is what's called the Foster Floodplain Natural Area. This is located at the heart of Johnson Creek's flood problems in the Lentz neighborhood, where Johnson Creek's gradient is flat and its floodplain extends to its widest. And as a result, the houses and roads in this neighborhood consistently flood. Heavy rainfalls caused the creek to flood Foster Road and the adjacent industrial, commercial, and residential properties on average about every other year. And that would damage the buildings, it would disrupt business operations, it would affect transportation connectivity between our major highways and this community. And it was a significant barrier to economic development. Businesses weren't investing in this area because of these problems, and housing prices suffered. So our response was to work over 15 years through the Willing Seller Program to move 60 houses out of the floodplain. We removed a lot of soil in the area to create additional flood storage, almost 150 cubic meters. And we restored a lot of wetland and floodplain habitat and planted a lot of trees and shrubs and added a lot of large wood. So we have had a short period of record post-project on this one, and it's been a drier period with fewer floods, but the few that we have suggest that the project has helped to address flooding. Johnson Creek experienced rains after the completion of the project, and they pushed Johnson Creek to more than 2 feet above its historic flood stage. These filled the restoration site with water, but during those events, Foster Road remained dry, and the local businesses remained open during a flood that would have previously closed them. So the last example project is called the Crystal Springs Culvert Replacements. And these are located in Crystal Springs, which are a spring-fed creek that's close to the Willamette River, which is a really important salmon river, so it's close to the major river, provides important off-channel habitat. We removed a concrete walled duck pond that was a heat source, shown in the upper left here. We replaced it with a wetland. We replaced 9 culverts along its length, shown in the map in the lower right there. And then we also added large wood and root wads and planted riparian areas, as shown in the middle there. We had a large number of partners, as all these projects did, at the federal, state, and local level, environmental and nonprofit groups, and the Watershed Council. And I wanted to talk a little bit about engaging our citizens. Citizen support of these projects is absolutely essential to their success. Johnson Creek had a long history of mistrust between government and its citizens. Historically, planning was done top-down with little citizen involvement or citizens being informed after most decisions had been made. It took a lot of effort and time in the community to rebuild trust over time, a lot of listening and addressing concerns that were raised, but they wouldn't have sold us their houses willingly or supported the project without that extensive work. And we were very proud of the fact that we never had to invoke eminent domain where the government pays for it but takes it by force. So we were proud that all the sales were willing sales. And conversely, we would have had to fight political opposition that probably would have doomed these projects, because these are new approaches without a proven track record, and those are very vulnerable to political opposition. It was really important to us to engage our indigenous communities as well. Like the rest of the U.S., Portland and Oregon's lands were taken from the original native inhabitants through a combination of force, disease, and broken treaties and other means. And with nature-based solutions, we realized that the tribes had been doing this for thousands of years before us, and we had a lot to learn from them. We have a term for this. We call it indigenous traditional ecological knowledge, and it reflects the fact that the region's tribes have lived in and learned from the land for millennia. The tribes knew that humans and nature are interconnected, and that the food, medicines, and materials we rely on for life today have to be managed sustainably so that the 7th generation after us can enjoy the same quality of life. So the tribes have been really important and highly valued partners in this work and in the plan. We consulted with the tribes on restoration approaches and to identify traditional plants that were important as food, materials, and medicines such as wapato, Oregon grape, and camas. And we involved them in development and construction. Groups like the Wisdom of the Elders to obtain grant funding and provide job training for low-income Native Americans. And in turn, their work was really invaluable in restoring the wetlands, streams, and riparian areas at several of the projects in this plan. So I've told you the hopeful side of this, and I hope I've convinced you of some of that. There is a lot to that, but I don't want to not point out that there are always challenges with new approaches like this. Funding is an obvious one. It's almost not worth saying, but it's gotten to historically challenging levels. The federal government in the U.S. has gone from being one of our biggest supporters and funders of work like this to being one of the biggest threats to these actions. And they are not only pulling funding, they're actively trying to destroy and discredit any environmental work. At the same time, that's going on at the federal level. At our local level, the city has fallen behind on maintaining a lot of its great infrastructure, things like pipes, wastewater treatment plants, and roads. We're just a lot better at building things than we are at maintaining them. So the bill for maintaining the infrastructure is going to pull away a lot of funding for a while, and I suspect that our rate of doing these projects is going to be a lot less over the next decade than it was over the last decade. Community support, I've talked a good bit, so I won't say too much about that, but it's just another challenge. It takes a lot of work and it takes rebuilding trust. But there's also a lot of competing uses. The land along rivers and streams is very valuable for a wide number of uses, and giving the river the room to flood and to develop healthy riparian areas is often in conflict with other uses whose economic benefits are more tangible and widely understood. So this is an area where we hope that ecosystem services can help make clear many of the wide-ranging economic benefits of healthy rivers with adequate areas to flood, and things like tallying the insurance and other costs of maintaining infrastructure in harm's way is another tool that we've used here. The West Coast cities in the U.S. have comparatively high homeless populations due to a number of factors, including the fact that we don't have lethal weather. Our summers and our winters are very mild, and it's possible to live outside year-round. This problem really exploded during the pandemic when there were fewer residents out visiting natural areas, and it was harder and even unsafe to devote time and resources to patrolling these areas. And we've actually made a lot of progress on this in the last few years, but it's increased the cost of these efforts. So going back to the first bullet I've indicated on this slide. So just recently, we conducted a retrospective analysis of the 15 projects that were submitted in the report I described, or will be describing here in a minute. And what we did is we cataloged lessons learned and used those findings to improve future projects. So we listed the metrics of success, the challenges, the lesson learned, and the result. And some examples of that is we noted that some of the components could have been designed to benefit a wider range of species and create more diverse hydrologic conditions across the floodplain. Beaver will be present, they will graze on our plantings, they will build dams, so we need to account for this in the design. And beaver relocations don't work, they just come back, and the state has increasingly strongly discouraged this. It highlighted the need for greater flexibility in our permit requirements to allow adaptive management of plantings. Initially, we like to overplant to compensate for mortality that naturally occurs, but the permits are now requiring these densities, but pairing that with a one-to-one replacement requirement, which is not ideal. And they often focus almost exclusively on trees when shrubs and other plants may be appropriate in certain locations, particularly as you get lower in the floodplain. We've learned that the requirements and constraints that federal partners have who are working at the national level may not account for some unique local conditions. And this was an issue in Crystal Springs. It's an unusual spring-fed creek and probably resulted in an oversized channel there that may contribute to some siltation issues that we've noted there. So a few years back, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature began a study of nature-based solutions and developing global standards for these practices. And a colleague at the University of California, Berkeley, Anna Sarah Yobet, was aware of our work and recruited my colleague Shana Anderson and I to partake in the study. So we submitted the Johnson Creek Restoration Plan as a case study. And this resulted in the publication which Fiona Berry came across and is responsible for my presence here today. So the IUCN scored case studies against a global standard for NBS. So they had 8 criteria, which are listed on the right here, with 28 associated indicators. There are things like how well does it address societal challenges, ecosystem integrity, is it economically viable, is it managed adaptively? And what we found was that some of our strengths were design at scale and biodiversity and ecosystem integrity. And I think that's because of the importance of salmon recovery to the region and as a driver of all this. Biodiversity is at the heart of and a major driver of the efforts that we're undertaking here. Salmon are a keystone species, so they require healthy catchment-wide conditions that benefit a wide range of other species. So it results in an overall ecosystem increase in health. And they're also migratory species that cross jurisdictional lines. So you can't solve it just in your own jurisdiction. You have to work with your partners. And so that it almost forces a lot of regional coordination. Some of the weaknesses were economic viability. That's partly because these projects are just expensive in urban areas, and fully accounting for the benefits of nature-based solution is really an embryonic and evolving science. And we're at a transitional phase where I think we're moving towards a more comprehensive and quantitative way of accounting for these using tools like ecosystem services and natural asset management. I think this process was really beneficial for the city in its nature-based approaches. It encouraged us to look more comprehensively and rigorously at how we evaluate them, and I hope it's going to gain some international attention and collaboration. I wouldn't have been here today without this study, and I hope it's the first of many. The downsides were it was pretty labor intensive to fill out the questionnaire with all those indicators. Sometimes the questions were a little vague or hard to tie to your work, and it can be hard to capture some of the nuances and some of the things that you thought were most important when you're kind of filling out an individual spreadsheet cell. So hopefully I am not over my time here, but I just wanted to say there's a few important things I didn't talk about. Climate change, which could be a whole separate talk, and the fact that we monitor at the catchment and project scale to guide, evaluate, and improve our actions. But I hope I've given you a sense that NBS and nature-based solutions are some of our most important tools for addressing our most pressing environmental problems, including flooding. And while we were early adopters, we still have a long way to go. In particular, strengthening the economic valuation of NBS. We live in a capitalist world, and if we can't make the case economically, we'll lose out on trying to foster these efforts. And we need to exert constant vigilance to ensure that all citizens are engaged and benefit from these nature-based solutions. I thank you very much for inviting me today, and I really look forward to hearing more about your projects as well.